Hey guys, I'm excited to introduce our latest GTO Wizard Pro, the legendary Joey Ingram. In this video, Joey and I study button versus cutoff 3-bet pot strategies in cash games. We hope you enjoy.
All right, what's up, guys? I'm Joey Ingram, and welcome to a journey that I'm taking down the 2-card Positional Winrates rabbit hole. And a lot of people out there know me for 4-card, for PLO, but few people know that I actually played millions of hands of Hold'em before I got into the beautiful, great game of Positional Winrates. And recently, once I started watching the live streams and seeing Hold'em start to make a rise and the high stakes make a comeback, and I started to see how these players played, I started developing more of a passion for learning Hold'em, and along the way, GTO Wizard Trainer and their program has been one of my main tools I've used, and I've loved their content, and especially this guy I'm collaborating with today. I'm sure you guys have loved his content too. If you've seen it, some of his stuff has really blown me away as I've been learning Hold'em. So we've done a few lessons before this, and we're going to do an official series where me and Tombos21 here are going to go down the rabbit hole, and yeah, man, it's gonna be a pleasure. I appreciate you you collabing with me, and I'm ready, man. I'm ready for whatever kind of wizardry you got to teach me, buddy.
Absolutely. And Joey, I am so psyched to have you on. I think this is going to be a really fun series. You bring up great energy to this. I really admire your enthusiasm and dedication. As he said, we're going to be stating Mr. Joey Ingram's journey through the technical game of No Limit Hold'em. And we're going to be studying spots one at a time, starting with the button. Now, just prior to this call, Joey was making a point that you have to be a god on the button. And the reason is, if you just look at theoretical win rates by position, the button accounts for a huge, huge portion of your win rate. And that's true regardless of whether or not you play micro stakes or high stakes. The button matters. And so nailing these spots, nailing spots where you're playing the button is going to be crucial to your long-term win rate. And we can see here that in a no-raked game, the expected value or the win rate of the button is about 25 big blinds per 100. And trust me, you'll need that to make up for the EV loss of playing in the blinds. Now, studying earlier positions and such, middle position, that's useful too, but you have to pick the low-hanging fruit first, and that's why we're starting here. Now, in today's video, we're going to be covering button versus cutoff 3-bet pots. So we're talking about spots where the cutoff opens, button 3-bets, cutoff calls, they check to us in position, and now we take a flop. Joey, I suppose maybe you could start me off by telling me a little bit about how you think about this spot now that you've been putting in so much study time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of converting over from this heads-up mindset, and as people know, I mean, not a lot of people play heads-up, but heads-up, you're playing 80-some% of your hands pre-flop on the button. And, so I'm trying to say, how do I play as many hands as possible on the button? How do I go crazy? And I've had to really rein myself in. So now that I've been reining myself in and not 3-betting every single king X suited, not 3-betting every sort of suited, 8-5, 8, I've always wanted to 3-bet all these hands. To me, they make sense as natural 3-bets. And they still really, if I'm going to open up my threshold at 3-betting, I'm going to start including some of those hands, especially against a lot of weaker players. But I think right now I'm trying to get a really understanding of just, sort of visually how the hand is going to work across 3 streets and how I can just set up a really rock solid pre-flop default flop strategy. So I'm finding that you really can't go wrong betting a third, and then you have these couple of different structures where there's basically 2 types of structures, where one structure you're betting small on, one structure you can bet bigger on, like the 3-3-4s and the deuce 5s and stuff like that. These low boards where you're just going to have a bigger overpair advantage, so you can kind of go crazy with those aces. So I'm trying to find that threshold with the ace queens. What are the combos I barrel? Why am I barreling them? Sort of like build out this deeper level understanding of why I can automatically bet a third on, any mono board, and all these ace high boards, all these king high boards, these queen high boards. You can just basically, you're printing betting a third. Yeah, I'm basically trying to take it to that next level, the turn and the river, and try to get a more better understanding of that, I guess you could say. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I think any part of building a strategy is starting from the big picture strategies first, and then slowly building down to the smaller parts of the game tree, if you will. And so one of the best ways to start is by examining these aggregate reports. What these reports do is that they show the aggregate strategy across all possible flops. There's 1,755 strategically distinct flops, 22,100 unique flops. And so there's a lot of different flops. How do we kind of simplify this and start building a strategy from all of this data, right? I think one of the very first steps to do is to just figure out what type of boards you want to have a big bet strategy, a small bet strategy, and what type of flops you mainly want to play defense on, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to group this by high card, and let's just take a look at some trends that we can infer here. So what this is showing us is that, for example, on jack high boards, you almost always want to bet in a button versus cutoff 3-bet pot. But on something like a 7 high board, you're checking back half the time here. So we want to try and develop these thresholds. So jack, for example, almost always going to be a bet. Low cards, we're mixing big bets, but lots of checks. And so I guess before we just start rote memorizing this stuff, we should maybe ask, why is it that we want to bet more often on these big cards and less often, but with a larger sizing on these low card flops? What do you think, Joey?
Pretty much range advantage. So you're going to have more aces, more kings, more queens, more jacks, more tens, and they're going to be 4-betting aces pure, theoretically, right? Aces pure, kings pure, queens pure. Even like their best ace king suited, they're going to be 4-betting those pure as well. So I feel like you can, maybe as simple as you can put it.
Yeah, exactly. So it all comes down to the difference between the ranges. And so what I've done here is I've opened up the ranges tab, and I've filtered for the calls. So this is really useful because it kind of gives you an idea of who's going to have the advantage on different boards, right? And in particular, we'll note that these king high, ace high flops are going to be great for the aggressor. No surprise there. Queen high is about the bottom of the cutoff's calling range, offsuit calling range. And the reason I always pay attention to the offsuit calling range is because even though these look smaller, like ace queen off accounts for many more combinations than ace queen suited. So one technique that I like to start with for just developing a sense of how I should categorize flops is to look at a range breakdown. So what I do is I copy these ranges into some software, and then I just use card removal to figure out who has the advantage or who has more of what type of card by rank. So that's how I make these charts here. So what this does is...
What is this?
Yeah. So this is a little private analysis technique I like to use. So basically, I just type in the number of combinations of cards, and then I take a little side-by-side and a difference thing. And so what this shows on the left-hand side is that, generally speaking, cutoff is going to have more of the 2x, 3x, 4x, 5x, all the way up to about 9x. And button, in position as the pre-flop aggressor, will of course have more jack x, queen x, king x, and ace x. And so by just starting with this card distribution difference, we can already find a nice line in the sand, and that is the 10. If the flop is above a 10, you're typically going to be betting often for a small size because you have a big range advantage. If the flop is less than a 10, you can no longer range bet, and you need to start considering a more polarized strategy. You can also take a look at a side-by-side view. Again, we have cutoff and button. And if we take a look at where this threshold is, this 10x, and just compare that with the aggregate reports over here, we can see that the trend follows very clearly. Flops that are greater than a 10, high frequency bet, pushing your range advantage. Flops that are lower than a 10, low frequency bet, only about half the time. And these darker squares indicate that we're using larger bet sizes. So just by studying aggregate reports like this, I think we can already start to develop some heuristics.
Can I ask you, okay, so when we have a range advantage, why do they like you to bet smaller versus bigger?
That's a great question, Joey. Often the reason is the types of hands you're interested in betting. So, for example, let's take a low bet board.
Because most people would think if you have aces, if you have kings, like I want to get max value, I'd want to bet bigger. That's how I think a lot of players think about poker like that. If they go, I'm going to bet smaller with ace 5, but I'm going to bet bigger with aces because I want to get paid when I have a big hand. So, and obviously, this isn't necessarily the way GTO Wizard thinks about it, but I think it's understanding the answer to that question helps you to better understand what the idea of balance and the idea of exploit and kind of build in like a baseline.
Yeah, great question. So on a board like King 9-3, it's very dry, it's disconnected, your opponent's going to have a hard time defending. The important thing to realize is that the amount of money you put in on the flop is not the amount of money your aces will get, right? If you bet big on the flop, sure, maybe you can get more money immediately, but less money all the way by showdown. Whereas by betting small, by keeping your range wide, you incentivize them to put in more money, which is going to be great for the top of your range. Furthermore, a lot of the hands in your range are going to benefit from equity denial when your advantage is so big that you can just bet everything, right? So for example, if you imagine you have a hand like 10-8 or Queen 10, lots of these hands have some type of equity, but they're definitely going to benefit from folding out, for example, all of these pocket pairs in the opponent's range. Now, compare this to some sort of low card board, let's say something like 9-8-5 two-tone. 9-8-5 two-tone, it's going to be very difficult to range bet. And the reason is our opponent, they still have pocket nines, they still have pocket eights, they've got pocket fives, they've got 9-8, they've got a bunch of draws, they've got ace 9, king 9. So we no longer have the nut advantage. And because we don't have that nut advantage, we cannot just range bet everything. We don't have that overwhelming equity advantage. So in this case, what you'll want to do is develop a check back range. Start pushing your equity with a more polarized range.
I mean, I definitely ask some questions about that. You know what I mean? I mean, that's a whole other rabbit hole, right? And I guess when you think about studying this, because to me, there's such different boards. You know, if I'm studying an ace king 5 board, it's going to be such a different way to think about it than on a 9-8-5 board. To me, it kind of makes sense to study the ace high boards first because we do have such a range advantage. So when I'm thinking about this lately, I've been saying, you know, why don't I focus on those ace high boards, because those are going to basically be my wheelhouse. Whereas on those boards, you know, 9-8-5, theoretically, when I see bet big with kings and I get check raised, you know, if I'm 100 BB, like, you know, I'm hanging on tight, and then I got to start making some reads. I got to decide if this is the kind of player who's going to be bluffing me or not. And, you know, maybe you could say most people aren't going to be bluffing you, so you can maybe get away from some of those hands. But even then, if you end up putting in 100 BB with overpair on 9-8-5, like, you could say it is what it is, especially if there's a frush draw out there too. So it's kind of like, you know, I'm developing, you know, your focus on my study, right? Or focus on that. So I find that something interesting to think about. I'm curious how you kind of would approach that, or you would recommend approaching that.
Well, I definitely agree with studying ace-high flops first, and not just because of the way they play, simply because they're more common. What I'm showing here is the aggregate report for all possible flops. And on the left-hand side, we see these little percentages. Now, these represent the proportion of high card flops. So 21.7% of flops are ace-high, 18.3% are king-high, 15.2% are queen-high. And when I show this to a lot of novices, they get confused because isn't a queen just as likely as an ace? Well, yes, but we're looking at it by high card, right? So ace, king, queen is an ace-high flop, right? Now, given that these flops are more common, you can get more value for your time by studying them compared to, for example, 7-high flops, which are far less common. Basic principle of my teaching method is to focus on things that are going to be or have a bigger impact on your win rate immediately. And one of those would be taking into account the frequency of the type of textures you like to create. Now, speaking of textures, Joey, let me ask. Go ahead.
This is a really interesting screen because I've never seen this screen before. Yeah, I mean, it kind of ties in with the, you know, with kind of your predicted EV, and it even shows you, you know, why, like, it just gives different way to see the bet sizes, right? Because you can see 75%, you know, there's a drop off there, 6 and below, you are betting that big size pretty often. And then once it gets above 6, you're really not betting that size often at all, right? You're kind of going more half pot. So I find that kind of fascinating, where on that 7 to 10, it's more half pot. As you get past the 10, you start going really small, right? So you can kind of see the progression from the 20 to the 75. And then, you know, that part to me really stands out. The bigger, the smaller, the bigger.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just looking at this section here, as you were pointing out, you can see a very, very common trend where these low card boards, you're checking a lot, but you're also betting big sizes. And then at these high card boards, you're checking rarely, but you're betting smaller. And this is a typical trend you'll see in Hold'em GTO strategies, is that this is a rule of thumb, not like a hard law of game theory, but generally speaking, when you want to bet most of your range, you want to bet small because you've got a lot of mergy hands in there. And when you're forced to develop a significant check back range, you'll want to bet bigger. In this case, it also happens that on, for example, 9-high and below boards, part of the reason a larger, more geometric sized bet is preferred is because the value of fold equity is higher. So for example, if we bet half pot on 9-8-5 with, let's say you have ace 9 here, or jack 9 or queen 9 or something, there's a lot of value to folding out these overcards. Even though those hands are technically behind, a top pair, for example, folding out that equity has a lot of value. Now, if you compare this to, for example, an ace-high flop, let's say you bet top pair here, ace queen, ace 10, something like that, for like a medium size. Well, congratulations, you're folding out a lot of hands that you already dominated. Like ace queen is not thrilled to be folding out king jack or king queen or queen jack. So you have to think about not just range and nut advantage, but the value of fold equity, as I call it, the value of denying equity given what the top of your range wants. Now, that said, I do want to just show you one more technique that I use for studying aggregate reports, because I think once you've got your game plan down, it's going to be easier to focus on follow through. I recommend keeping this relatively simple. Take some sort of spot like this. So here we're looking at, again, cutoff versus button 3-bet pot. Break it down into something like 4 to 8 different types of boards, however many you feel that you should be studying. And these types of boards should be somewhat canonical, meaning like monotone paired, dry disconnected, high card, stuff like that. And then study and practice those types of flops separately. Now, for example, the way I like to just learn about these textures is by going to the aggregate reports and just applying filters until I find strategically similar spots. So we have all the low flops, high flops. Now, one thing I've noticed is that in particular, disconnected rainbow flops are almost always going to be a bet. And so what I do is I just pick some filters here, and then I take a look at the aggregate betting frequencies here. And we can see that the vast majority of these flops are just going to be range bets, usually for a small size. If it's a lower board, then even more for a medium size. So that'd be, for me, one type of category of flop, rainbow disconnected. Another one that I would choose would perhaps be ace through jack high, unpaired, not monotone. We've seen before with that chart that typically the ace through jack high, again, are going to be the boards you bet the most. And again, we can see that these boards are typically range bets, right? Surprisingly, the boards where you might choose not to range bet are ace, wheel boards. So these are boards that have some potential wheel straight draw. And in particular, like if you look at ace 5-4, there's not a ton of incentive to generate fold equity on these types of flops because you, as the button, don't really have much second and third pair. Like you don't have a whole lot of 5x or 4x. So your incentive to kind of go for like a small mergey bet is reduced. And you're not folding out any overcards because there are no overcards. So there's not a lot of incentive to deny equity either. For that reason, sometimes the amount you bet isn't just about the strength of your range, because for sure button has an advantage on ace 5-4. Sometimes it's about the incentives to deny equity as well, and the incentives to bet with more middling strength hands. If you compare that to something like ace 10-4, ace 10-4, we have a lot of 10x that would happily get some money in. We have enough of an advantage that we don't need to be too worried about facing aggressive check raises. And again, we can see at the cutoff where it goes from like betting half the time to betting a lot is, again, around the 10, as we noted earlier, the critical threshold card, if you will.
Right. The 10 is very important. It is the threshold here. It's pretty interesting to see that. Yeah. Once you get to the 9, you're just checking a lot more.
Yeah. And we'll notice the same pattern on a lot of other spots too. So here's queen 8x, queen 9x, queen, and then boom, queen 10x, it shoots up, right? Because all of a sudden we start having a lot of 10x relative to the cutoff. And I'll mention that the critical threshold card tends to change depending on the spot you study. In this spot, usually it's going to be around there. And then, of course, we have paired boards. So this would be like another major canonical type of texture. Again, you want to bet often on paired boards. But the main thing to focus on with paired boards is not whether or not it's paired, but where the pair is. So if we go down here, we can see that, for example, 7 deuce deuce, 6 3 3, 8 deuce deuce, all of these cards where the pair is a low card that, a spot basically where we can't represent many trips. But those are the types of paired cards where you don't want to range bets anymore. And it's often going to be better to start polarizing.
Wow, interesting. I would think on like 5 deuce deuce, you'd want to be just betting all the time in position because you have such a big range advantage. I mean, I guess because you're not going to have trips, but at the same time, they have ace deuce, but they're going to fold ace deuce sometimes too, so they don't necessarily have the trips as well. They're going to have more 5s because 5s is pure pre-flop, and you probably won't have 5s. You're probably not 3-betting 5s. So I would just imagine that you would just bet bigger here. So that's pretty surprising to see that it does like to.
5 deuce deuce, no one really has any trips, but I will say that at some point, the pocket pair categories start to count for more. Like in this case, they still have a lot of overcards or overpairs, and that definitely counts towards something here. But we'll also notice that the button often likes to size up. And so a lot of people will look at something, I'll even get rid of the flush draw, make that like 5 of clubs or something. People will look at this and say, oh, this is a very, very dry texture. But I think one of the problems with the small bet here is that it's just not super effective. Like, look at the hands you're folding out. Queen Jack, Queen 10, Jack 10. Like, the types of hands you fold with a small bet here aren't really the types of hands you want to be folding. So what the solver likes to do instead is it likes to start targeting some of the pocket pairs, like a 75% size here, some of the ace high, king high. It wants to start targeting these hands for indifference. So we can see, like, for example, here, 40% of the time we're going with this big size. 75% is big at this SPR. It's weird because in single raise pots, typically you see paired board, small bet. But in 3-bet pots, paired boards often means bigger bet because the idea is to challenge these pocket pairs. If not on this straight, then on following straights. And the 20% bet, I mean, they're folding hands that are like when you bet 20% and they're folding some of these hands here, 10-9, these are worse than your bluffs. It's hard to bluff someone off a worse hand.
So then how do you think about checking back? Because according to, it's basically saying, and as the button, you want to be checking back more on these low boards. So, it's checking back aces, it's checking back, it seems like it's basically checking back
lots of ace high. And I feel like people are kind of afraid to check back these spots. But to be honest, the way I look at it is that the button's equity tends to appreciate here because we benefit from most high card runouts are going to benefit us. Whereas like the medium card runouts would benefit the cutoff. But the medium strength runouts, for example, if we go check, check, we can just take a look at the turn reports here. What I'm going to do is just show you the expected value of runouts for the button. The higher this line, the greater the expected value. And so, of course, we're going to be benefited when the turn card is 10 or higher, and the cutoff is going to be benefited when the turn card is 9 or lower. But even if the turn card is 9 or lower, the river card, again, be a high card. So generally, when you're in a spot where you have a lot of overcards and not a lot of made hands relative to the flop, the reason you want to check back range is because, first of all, there's not a lot of incentive to fold out worse overcards. Secondly, even if you do fold out worse overcards, sometimes it can be better to keep your opponent's range wide, let their equity depreciate, like let their, an ace run off and hurt their queen high or whatever, and have your hand appreciate in value just by letting some more cards run off. So sometimes just being patient is a good weapon in poker.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, especially because, the turn in the river, I feel like that's where people start to go crazy. Their brain starts to break if you check back the flop on 5 deuce deuce and they're not really going to know what to make of it necessarily. So it's nice to have some of those aces, and it also makes your hand seem like easier to play on the turn and on the river oftentimes too, because if they bet, you can call, and if they bet, you can fold or you can call. So it's kind of like it seems like an easy position to play as the button when checked and facing a turn decision too.
It is, yeah. It's way easier to play, for example, ace king as a check here, in my opinion, because I don't gain anything from folding out queen 10, jack 9. Like, what do I care if these hands fold when I have ace king? That's not great. I would rather keep those hands in range. On the turn, it becomes much easier to play a hand like ace king. And one of the techniques I like to use to do this is by taking a look again at the turn reports and then using the strategy here. So here it's gone check, check. Turn is any card, check. Action on us in the button. And here I'm just going to filter, for example, for ace king. Now what this does is it shows me how I should play my ace king across all turn cards on this flop. First thing I'll notice is, okay, if the turn goes check, check, and I hit a pair, bet it, right? And for a big size too, like we're playing for stacks. So here's a question to you, Joey. Why do you think it is that we want to bet pretty big on a king? In fact, it's over betting here, like 175. But on an ace, it's betting a bit smaller, like 75, when we have ace king.
It's a good question. I mean, I guess for the king, so it likes us to bet a lot bigger on the king. Well, we've already kind of saw from that previous report that it just loves a king, right? It barely checks back the king. So I think that we're going to have a lot more kings than they're going to have. And they're probably going to 4-bet most of their ace kings. They might have king queen suited, maybe some king jack suited. And maybe we're just going to have a lot more kings in our range. And we're also going to potentially have aces too. And we're going to have more pocket kings. So I don't know, all things to consider, I guess. But what do you think it is?
I think which you said is pretty spot on. We're definitely going to have an advantage on ace X and king X turn cards. And I think one of the main things is that on a king X turn card, a lot of our, for example, king queen, king jack, king 10, a lot of these hands are going to want to try and fold out some of cutoff's ace X hands, right? So imagine you check back some sort of top pair here and an ace comes on the river. That kind of sucks for a hand like king 8, right? Whereas there's lots of value to here. I like a pot size bet generally, but it wants a nice big bet here. But there's a lot of value to folding out these overcards, right? I couldn't care much about folding out most of these, but folding out the ace highs is quite useful. And I can still get a decent amount of value from these worst pocket pairs. Generally in 3-bet pots, especially on when it comes to turn and river, what I'm thinking about is a few main factors. First of all is how does my hand play against the pocket pair? Because this is going to comprise, usually on most runouts, the majority of their call down range. So I want to think about how my hand is doing against these types of pairs. And secondly, I want to think about what their overcards to top pair are doing. And here, if I bet big, I know I can fold out a lot of equity. Let's try something else here, Joey. What do you do when, let's say, the flop goes check, check, and out of position pro bets? How do you like to handle these spots?
Yeah, how do I like to handle these spots? Usually, usually some mixing, some calling, some folding. I mean, probably just depending on what the turn is. If I have my ace highs, I check back. I have my ace queens. I have my ace jacks. Like some of my pairs that I mixed and checked back. I'm just gonna call the turn and call some, raise some. I'll probably fold like my, for some reason, if I didn't see bet, I mean, I don't know why, but if I didn't see bet my like 7-8 suiteds here, if I didn't see bet like my queen X suiteds or my jack X suited or 10X suited, and depending on the card, I might just start folding some too. So, but versus like that size bet, I don't think I'd fold many ace highs on, if I got 2 overcards on a 10, I'm probably going to call at least one street and then maybe try to get a showdown, maybe sometimes turn it into a bluff. So I'm probably staying versatile at this point in time. But if it's against someone I feel like is, crushing me, I might just start folding here too and make my life a little bit easier.
I think you've got the right idea here. Generally against this small, like 33% pro bet, you don't really want to be folding a whole lot of ace high most of the time, especially on a board like this, right? You can't fold ace high here. Got to call that down. So one thing that I like to do to try and develop my strategies here is to test out some random textures and just get a sense of my thresholds. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press S a couple times, SS. And what this does is it just groups these actions together. And what I want to do here is just kind of develop thresholds. So what am I raising for value? If I hover over this little icon here, I can see how the raising range is constructed across all of these different sizes that we've given it. And we can see that on a board like 5 deuce deuce 4, typically going to be raising over pairs, straights, and boats for value. Not so much top pair on this board. And then lots of ace high, king high, these types of hands, some gut shots, for example, as bluffs. Now, what I'll do is, because this is just one spot, I'll randomize it. Bam, ace 10, 6, 5. Imagine we went check, check here. I don't think we would. This is kind of a range bet spot, but just to develop a sense of what's folding. In this case, we can even see pocket kings is folding a little bit. These pocket pairs start to fold, but we have a lot of hands here. And what's raising for value? I guess 2 pair sets, maybe a little bit of ace queen, but again, we don't get here too often. And then I just keep randomizing like this, and I try and develop a sense of what can I raise for value? What's the strongest hand I fold? In this case, the strongest hand I fold is low pair on ace queen 5 jack. What do I raise for value? Typically, we're going to be looking at, I think in game, I would go with ace king. Like, I don't think I would have the cojones to raise ace 6 here, but okay. So I just keep going through it like this. Okay, flush completing turn. What are we raising for value? Sets. What are we starting to fold here? Ace high on these flush completing turns can start folding, etc. And this is just kind of actually I'll randomize it a few more times. Let's try and get like a low card board.
I love how you randomize the board textures too. You're a master randomizer. How do you know you come up with this strategy? You start randomizing it. I don't know how you come up with this idea, but
you could, in theory, just prepare a subset of turn cards to look at. But there's a lot of turn cards.
This is interesting. Right? Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty interesting way to think about it. Yeah, to go through.
Again, once you do this for like 10 minutes, you're going to start to see the patterns emerge. So again, we see typically strong top pair plus is raising for value. Typically, ace high, sometimes low pair, if it's a very connected run out, is going to start folding. But everything in between, your made hands, your flush draws, your open enders, these hands cannot be folding against this size. And I think just you spend 10 minutes going through that, all of a sudden you start to feel a lot more comfortable in these check lines where you face a pro bet.
100%. That's definitely something, one of the spots I need to work a little bit more on, because I feel like I got my c-betting strategy node down, but the checking back one is also very powerful too. So you need to be prepared for both, and you need to be practiced for both, in my opinion. So that's for me, my strategy. It's going to be my plan.
People underestimate the power of just pressing the check button on the flop. There's back in the day, very few people were developing their delayed bets and their check lines. And so the first people who kind of took advantage of that had a big edge in the game. Let's move on to a different topic here. Now, Joey, can you tell me a little bit about how you like to structure your bet sizing across multiple streets?
Sure. I mean, normally if I'm going to start off betting big on the flop and like a big board texture, then oftentimes I'm going to be betting pretty big on the turn. This is kind of assuming 100 BB. If I'm betting small on the turn, then on certain board textures, then most times, once again, I'm probably going to go like small flop, 66 turn, and then most times just shove river. You know, if I have a hand for value and my bet strategy is going to be 33, then I'm probably just going to go bigger. And that's going to be my like default value get in for the most part. And I feel like you can't really go wrong with that 100 BB. In terms of for the other big bets, I would say my issue comes in is when I'm on the river and I have to decide what I follow through with. Because let's say I bet big on that flop, I bet big on that turn. On the river, I'm going to need some bluffs. So deciding what the bluffs are is kind of where I would say I'm challenged at that line right now. Just, you know, identifying and having like a heuristic to think through that process.
That one's a tricky subject. So let's start there, and I'll talk a little bit more about the game tree later. Let's pick some sort of flop here. We'll go bet call and turn. Let's put it like a 10 here.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the easiest, just big bet spot ever.
Yeah,
you know, like
exactly.
These boards, you know, these boards are just they play themselves almost. To me, you know, it's just like if you're going to bet or check here, you're betting big or you're checking.
Yeah, exactly. Just play a nice geometric size here. I wish they had 66%. That would be perfect here. We can, of course, solve that in, but very easy. You've got low, and then double Broadway, where again,
this is pretty common because you're going to be c-betting. You're going to be barreling with ace queen, ace jack, ace 7, pretty much all ace, like a lot of ace highs here. You know, the better aces are going to mix, but the worse aces are going to be pure. Here for betting, you can see like ace 6, ace 7. So that board's interesting because then once you get called twice, your river bluff is, you know, I feel like you do have to mix in some of those hands as bluff sometimes too. It's just like hitting the right frequencies. And because on the flush draw boards, you know, they're going to have some flush draws. They're going to have some suited, you know, 7-8 suited. They're going to have some king queens, king jacks, some slow played sets, some, you know, ace deuces maybe that, you know, my ace deuce probably actually going to fold the turn. But so it's interesting to think about, you know, how does our range interact with their range and then come into some understanding of that strategy.
Yeah, this is where the power of the ranges tab becomes really apparent. Using this comparison here, where you're looking at the ranges side by side and inferring, okay, given these range asymmetries, what does my range want to do? And then just clicking the strategy button and observing the strategy, making those connections is going to be really powerful. So, yeah. Ranges tab, severely underutilized for sure. So you had mentioned a little bit about bluffing and like choosing the right bluffs. This is a spot where there are many playable strategies, not this board in particular, but in position river bets. Typically, it doesn't matter so much what you're bluffing with as long as it's like bottom of range stuff. It's more important how often you're bluffing overall. And so the first thought that crosses my mind when I would get to a river spot after a double barrel isn't what type of bluffs should I use? It's how many bluffs do I get here with in the first place? In this case, it's gone king 10, 4-3 deuce, so lots of bricks. And of course, we have a whole lot of random ace high trash, right? And that's of course going to mean that it's going to want to turn some of that ace high trash into a bluff. But what I like to do sometimes is just iterate this river card. So here's the 3. And again, I'm just going to highlight trash hands. Same concept. 4.
Yeah, so here's actually a problem I had when I first started this spot was that I didn't realize how bad the ace 7, ace 6, those aces were. And I didn't realize how bad ace high hand in general was for no showdown, right? Like in my mind, those hands sometimes will have showdown, but it doesn't matter that they have showdown. Those are the hands that become the pure bluffs. That was something that took me a little bit of time to get comfortable with. Like when I see king 4-3, I know if I have a7 or a6, like we got to go all in. You know what I mean? So that took a while.
And like, here's the thing: it has, let's say, 7, 8, maybe 10% equity, maybe more if your opponent's a station. And so these hands do have some showdown value. And if you were to instead give the solver complete garbage here, stuff that cannot win, he would bet those instead, right? But it doesn't have enough low equity trash. So if we just go to the summary tab, sort by equity, and I guess click again, you can see that we really don't have, like, these hands are barely at range. Like, we basically never have these low card hands. And so a lot of the time, it has to turn some of these ace high hands into bluffs simply because you're running out of bluffs, right? Like, if I just filter for the lowest, like less than 25% garbage in our range, we really don't have much, right? So I'm showing the strategy and the equity here. A6 is one of the worst hands you can even get here with. Not to say it's like can never win, but that's why I say you got to think about what bluffs do you actually arrive here with. And if the answer is not many, you got to start turning stronger hands into bluffs. And so sometimes what I'll do is I'll just shift left or shift right is the hotkey for this, is I'll just cycle through all of the river ranks and start to see what happens with different parts of my range. So on most of these low cards, we're still going to turn lots of ace high into bluffs. But if I go up to, let's say we go to a 10, what happens to our strategy now? Like, we'll notice that something happens right around this range, a jack, I think, which also completes some straight draws, is that a lot of our top pair stops going all in here. What do you think, Joey? Would you ship it with ace king here?
No, I used to ship it with ace king until I kept getting a bad mark of shipping with ace king, and then I realized that I would have to go think about it differently. Because so if I feel like if I have a dynamic develop with you and you know I'm bluffing and I feel like you're just going to be overcalling, then I'm gonna be shipping in here. I'm gonna pray you don't have king jack. I'm gonna hope that you have king queen, because also, like, at some point in time, if you see an opponent, God forbid they start calling you down with ace 4, God forbid they start calling you down with like 9-10 suited here or something like that, then to me, those are the people that I want to identify, and I want to be betting my ace king for value. And if I undercut myself 100 big blinds deep, that kind of is what it is. So as a standard, I would say as a default, I would just check back. But I mean, once I know that you're calling me more in this situation, I'm 100% betting this for value.
Something to pay attention to in 3-bet pots is, in particular, how ace queen is affected, because ace queen is going to be the most prominent hand in the pre-flop callers range. Generally speaking, ace queen or king queen.
That makes sense.
And this is true in most 3-bet pots. Ace queen is like the one spot you want to pay attention to. So when the board comes king 10 jack and ace queen all of a sudden becomes the nut straight, you got to start being a little more careful here. But if I change this ace queen to, let's say, if I change this jack to a queen, feeling we're going to be a little more aggressive, right? So now we can start chipping it with ace king, simply because ace queen is no longer the nut straight. We're not worried about our opponents having those hands as much. And now you can start shipping it, right? So always think about, especially in a triple barrel line where their range is going to be quite tight when they call down, think about that nut distribution.
I mean, look at those bluffs. Look at that. That's a real interesting card. So check this out. Every ace high and low pair just goes off here. Even your reverse blockers, your 6s, 6-5, those are going crazy here. That's pretty fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I think part of it is, like, we just take a look at top pair plus. There are so many hands here that want to just get the money, and Joey. And when you want to value bet more, you also have to bluff more. And so for that reason, it starts turning even hands that have some reasonable showdown value, low pairs, ace highs, all of these hands into bluffs. And it has to bluff more because we're value betting more. The only hands that have a strong incentive to check back would maybe be our second pair here, Queen X.
Yeah, I wonder what their calling range is here.
Good question. Let's see. Looks like they're calling with 2-pair plus always, which isn't like, sure, they have king, queen, and some top pair. Just a little, like, the solver is going to merge in some of these second and third pair hands just to avoid having too many blocker weaknesses. But yeah, for the most part, we're looking at.
So they don't have anything to call with here.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to call. I think in reality, most people are just going to be calling down with like top pair plus, probably folding most of these second and third pair.
Yeah, I would say like they're going to be over ambitious overtly calling with ace queen, and then once it depends on, like, this is why you got to show them down some bad hands sometimes. Is okay, so now if they start turning some of these hands into pure calls where they're always calling with all their king highs, and you can kind of run it differently, and then if you look at that strategy, then you might be able to, you might realize your play here as in position might be a little bit different. So it's kind of interesting to think about if that would affect your strategy at all in terms of, those ace highs being pure bluffs. Well, sometimes if they're over calling you, then some of those bluffs actually don't become GTO anymore. They become bad bluffs.
Indeed. A lot of these bluffs here will stop making sense if they're not getting enough fold equity, especially on the river, right? Like, it still makes sense to bluff a lot of these hands on earlier straights because you're denying equity. But by the river, if you're fairly confident that your opponent is going to station you down, well, don't bluff a station. That said, if they never see you show up with any of those hands, maybe they stop calling down light.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it goes, but you can make a justification for either thing. That's what's great about 100 big blinds, Tombos, is like, you can just like bet, just bet on the river, just bet. You know what I mean?
Yeah, especially 3-bet pots. You can just play for stacks.
Yeah, 3-bet pots. I mean, you don't really got a lot of things to worry about at that point in time. Just start betting and say your prayers.
So let's try one experiment here. We're going to change that 10 to a 10 of hearts, which completes the flush. And I think something we'll notice here is that I think a lot of players are a little too aggressive on flush completing runouts. So if I go over to the turn reports here, I don't want any, so I'm not filtering for anything. I just want to show this by.
I'd say this spot's pretty a little bit more tricky for me too, because just visualize it in flush versus flush ranges, and how to value top pairs here, how to value your ace king no heart, how to value your king queen no heart, and then how to decide the combos that you want to bluff with in terms of their side cards and reverse blockers and stuff like that. So this is way different spot, even though it would seem pretty similar. It's actually a lot different.
It is, yeah. It's a tricky spot, I think. And part of the reason for this on flush completing boards is that you don't necessarily want to have a big bet anymore, or not on a lot of flush completing runouts. And the reason is that if you start to bet too big on, for example, the 10 of hearts here, then you're not getting enough value with hands like top pairs, over pairs, and you're narrowing their range too quickly towards flushes and such. So what ends up happening, if we go to the strategy here, is that playing a little more passively, but we're also typically going to start lowering our bet size a bit. So you'll see a lot of 50%, a lot of 33%, these smaller sizes. And we'll even see that, and this is like a nice tactic to know about on a lot of these runouts, is that maybe I can make it even more obvious with something like an 8 of hearts. A lot of the underpair cards will go for a second small bet. So this is like a sneaky play that a lot of people like to use. Let's say you have queens here, flop comes king 4-3. You're thinking, oh crap, I hate life. I've got queens. You bet small on the flop, they stick around. You're not happy, but you can actually just put in another small bet on the turn on these flush completing runouts, especially when you have flush card blocker. I should add that this is a good question to you, Joey, and the rest of the audience. Why do we think it is that Queen of Hearts, Queen of Diamonds wants to bet here, but for example, let's say Queen without a heart does not?
This spot's actually this shows up a lot in single race pot in position as well, where you can start like small bet, the flop and turn with these like second pair hands. So it's kind of interesting. It shows up here too. I would imagine in this spot with the Queen of Hearts, you can cooler some hands and you have some implied odds in terms of getting to the river with the heart. So I would imagine that you're kind of like, it's like a merge in some ways where you have the implied odds. You also can get called by worse pairs that have a heart too. And then even if it's a king, then you could potentially still draw that hand.
Absolutely spot on, And so the important thing to realize is that if we're going for a double small bet strategy or like a small medium bet strategy, they still have to call down with a bunch of pocket pairs, like look at all these low pairs that they have to call you down with. You're still extracting like some super thin value when you bet with hand like queens here. And so that's going to be a big part of it. Obviously, you don't want to bet like huge on a flush completing run out, but the nice part about this is also it's kind of an equity realization play to bet with thin value here, because if you bet twice, you get some value from these static bluff catchers, and then you can just kind of check back the river and enjoy life, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I like that small bet on the turn. Like kind of once you bet the turn here, your river decision's real easy, right? Just check back or bet for value or bluff. I mean, it kind of like takes away some I guess like problem spots I see. You know what I'm saying? I see some hands like I don't want to have to check back a hand here and then the river, you know, the guy goes 150% or something like that. I'm like, oh my God. You know, I'm kind of avoiding a spot by the river against all players, right? I wouldn't say this is applicable against everybody, but you know, against those people that are really coming after you, really putting pressure on you, and maybe they're going kamikaze with some of their bluffs on the river, and you just don't want to have to force yourself to make that decision. Kind of just betting a turn, taking the initiative away, and kind of even having on these flush completing boards, you know, maybe just going small as your only strategy is like an easy way to play it. You know, you don't really got to think much about it. You know, check like, okay, once we bet a third on this flop, and if we say, okay, like let's not complicate things, let's just bet a third or bet half on the flush completing turn. This board is very common, and that spot is very common. So then you kind of need to just plan your river strategy to have a good understanding of what you want to do, and then you kind of win that spot, you win that hand.
This is a nice way to develop a game plan, right? We start thinking about what sizes we'd like to use on different types of runouts. Then we start assigning some sort of value thresholds to those sizes and develop that game plan. And I think that's really an effective way to study, because what a lot of people will do instead, Joey, is instead of developing a game plan like you just did, what they'll do is they'll look at only one particular hand that they played. Oh, I played fives here. Oh, I folded fives here. Okay, call when it has the flush draw blocker, otherwise not. It's not an effective way to study. You want to get like a nice global game plan going.
Yeah, exactly. And you want to understand the thresholds, right? I mean, I think you're the one telling me this really was, once you start to understand the thresholds, then you can start to understand why you're deviating. You know, you're building your threshold strategy to exploit and understanding, okay, well, what does an exploit mean on this run out against this player? I might be doing this because of that. And against this player, I might be doing this because of that. So that's ideally where I'm personally trying to get to that understanding where, you know, I just know what to do against every player type. And I'm just making my decisions easy. I'm trying to make all my decisions easy, no blunders. And then that's what's great about these trainers is you can drill all these spots to test your knowledge. And wherever you're making your blunders, now you know, okay, I got to like ask my coach. I got to ask somebody like, what am I doing wrong here? So that's something I've been doing in my training is to identify where am I blundering, how am I blundering, and then, okay, what's going on here? So that's been real helpful for me because now think about it, we can just play this spot 100 times and test to see if we know what we're talking about or not.
So I guess the final thing that I wanted to chat about with you, Joey, how one can go about kind of designing drills and practicing their skills against the solver and honing their intuition. Of course, we have our GTO Wizard trainer here, but I want to show you kind of a special method because lots of people don't want to train with all of these different bet sizes. So what we can do instead is create a custom solution using GTO Wizard AI. And what this allows us to do is we can pick our own bet sizes. We can design, for example, and yes, I'm just going to click.
This is the one I use too. I would use this one too as a start. And then also you can edit these ranges pre-flop. So if you say, okay, well, I think my opponent's ranges are different, then you can edit these ones, right? So if you say, okay, well, they sometimes show up with ace king suited, you know, Lord willing, then you can start to add those in. This is what I really love about. I don't personally know how to use this that well, but I am definitely excited to learn more how to use this part.
Right, and so this is all just about learning how to build a sim. So I think a lot of people will just pure call ace queen off here. Some people are really good at four betting it, but some people just love to pure call. And then a lot of these like milling pocket pairs in the GTO sim, 8s, 9s, 7s, these will actually four bet at a low frequency, but I think in practice most people just pure call these. So you can, you know, plug in your own four bet strategy, you can plug in your opponent's perceived range, or just use the GTO ranges, etc. And there's your ranges, right? You can set the rake, all of that. And then here's the hard part. Now most people, when they first use like a proper do-it-yourself solver, they have no idea how to construct a game tree. They don't know what sizes to give it on flop, turn, and river. They don't necessarily know it's appropriate. But what I like about GTO Wizard is that it's got these automatic bet sizing trees. And so just to give you guys a tour of what this might look like, if I click automatic, it's going to automatically reduce it down to one bet size per flop, per turn, per run out. And that's going to change depending on the run out, right? So instead of having to learn these complicated mixed strategies, I can just say, click automatic, let it tell me what size the solver prefers in different spots. Obviously, we're going to get a lot of 40% here. Here, 773 likes a big size, etc. And then I can even take it a step further. And what I can do is plug in my own sizes. And let's say I like to choose on the flop let's say.
I usually go here like 25, 75, and then you're really not over betting. So sometimes if I'm experimenting, I'll put a check or over bet here too, just to build my over bet strategy as well. But I probably would go like 25, 75, and then check.
I think that's pretty good. Sometimes what I like to do if I'm making like a more general tree is I'll use what's called geometric sizing. And so this little E here,
That's smart.
Is
why do you like to do that? Why do you like to do that instead?
Because now it's going to automatically adjust to the stack to pot ratio. So if I want to come and reuse this betting tree 200 big blinds deep, it's going to adjust that 3E sizing so that I have a bigger bet when we're deeper and a smaller bet when we're shallower.
Makes sense, right? So as you get deeper, then you're going to start wanting to bet bigger here.
Right. And so to any people watching this video later who don't know, 3E just means betting an equal fraction of the pots on all three streets. We call that pot geometry. And it's featured within most of our sims. Very useful concept to understand within any 3-bet pot is pot geometry.
And why is that?
Yeah, great question. Essentially, pot geometry, let's take a toy game. Take some sort of polarized toy game where you have the nuts or bluff, and you want to figure out how can I get the most money out of my strategy? Like what bet sizings should I choose to make the most money? In a perfectly polarized toy game, it's always going to be betting geometrically. And the reason for that is that if you bet geometrically, your opponent is obligated to put the most money in the pot. Like for example, you can imagine that we just ship all in on the flop here. Our opponent is allowed to fold quite a bit. And we can imagine maybe we go 10% pot, 10% pot, all in on the river. Again, we want to get the chips in, but we want to do it in a way that causes them to call down as wide as possible. And it turns out that if you just take a look at the minimum defense frequency over all streets, betting geometrically will cause them to defend or obligates them to defend as wide as possible. That said, you don't always want to bet geometric. Sometimes there's competing incentives to bet small or bet a little bit larger than geometric for more fold equity. But what I like to do is just start with a simple geometric calculator. There's a formula. We have a whole blog about pot geometry and the theory behind it. But what I like to do is just plug in.
Well, I thought you have all these like random spreadsheets of idea. Like you showed me every time there's like a more impressive one down next one you show. It's like, oh my God. And there's like 4 tabs and it just gives you, I don't know. Yeah.
I love me a good spreadsheet, Joey.
Yeah, I can tell. Like it inspires me to make more spreadsheets. I've been making more, but not when I see all yours, I'm like, man.
What I like to do in any 3-bet pot is to do a little bit of SPR analysis. So here, for example, the starting pot is 92.5, or sorry, 16.5. The stack is 92.5. And so we can calculate the stack to pot ratio, 16.5, 92.5. And this will vary a bit depending on sizing, but essentially, if we bet 65% pot on all 3 streets, we're going to get it in by the river. So 2/3 is going to be the recommended big size, 100 big blinds deep. Now, if we were deeper, let's say, for example, we are 200 big blinds deep, you're going to want a bigger standard. You still want a small size, but your bigger size ought to be bigger because now we're, let's say, 191 and 18. Now your big size is closer to pots, right? And so this is how I like to think about how to plan my bet sizes is I generally want one small size and one geometric size. That's going to be especially powerful on later streets, like on the turn, where you have to start planning how do I get stacks in. And so when I'm building my game tree, what I'll often do is I'll use those geometric sizes in order to adjust to different spots. So maybe I'll just load one up here. These are some parameters that I've built and saved. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have in position have a 25% small bet and a 3E geometric size big bet. And then on the turn, instead of having 50, 80, etc., I'll just simplify it to something like 40% and 2E seems reasonable. And then on the river, I don't want a bet size less than half the pot in position. 1E is just all in. So I can create this solution and I can plug in whatever flop I want, take a look at the strategy, and it's going to automatically tell me what sizes are preferable here. So King Jack 7, especially since we've reduced it down to one size, we can range bets a lot more. Let's go take a look at like a low paired board, something like this. 886. 886 is going to be pretty bad for us. Actually, I guess not. I thought it would be worse for us, to be honest, but betting big here. You can see it's one size, but the size is dynamic, right? And it's true for like that for the entire tree. So at every decision point, I've set it to simplify down to one bet size, and that bet size is automatically generated. And the nice thing about this is that I can take this tree and I can go practice against it. This has the added effect of teaching me what bet sizes I should be using in different spots, allows me to customize my betting plan. And once, like, it'll automatically tell me what sizes to use, but then I can start actually practicing a strategy for those sizes. And so the old adage occurs. Let me clear that. It's not so important what size you use. It's more important how you implement that size. So Joey, here's our trainer. Now, I know you like multi-tabling. So in the controls panel, you can choose between 1 and 4 simultaneous tables. If you want to multi-table a bunch of spots and get feedback about your play, you can do it here.
Thought so far is that, I mean, this makes it a lot simpler, right? I mean, a lot of complaints people have is they don't want to memorize multiple sizes. So, you know, to me, this makes things easier. It's either going to bet 25% or you're going to bet like 70%. So you basically just have 2 sizes and then check. I mean, it becomes a lot easier to do, right? I mean, you know, even here, we already know, you know, like I already know all these spots just from kind of like, right. And, you know, bet all of them, you know what I mean? So it's kind of, these are all pretty interesting.
Joey says, bet them all. Bet them all, he says.
Bet them all. It's all GTO. And this is where the trouble happens.
And here we're facing check raise bottom left with aces, but we have the spade. Obviously, you can't fold this yet. The king comes along.
So here it's interesting because they, you wonder what they check raise you with. Sometimes they check raise you here with like ace queen, ace jack, like 10s and 9s, and they're very balanced when they check the turn, the wizard is. So sometimes they're going to be checking here with even ace king and kings, and I guess they don't have kings, but they have ace king offsuit here sometimes too.
Yeah. Let's actually take a look at that. So what are they representing? And again, the way I open this is I click this little light bulb. It's an info button. And now what I can do is I can just either jump to the solver or just open this up in a new window. And so now what I can do is let me take a little peek at what they were check raising me with. So king 10, 9 king, hand class distributions. Well, they've got a lot of boats, a lot of straights, a lot of trips. So this is what they're representing when they hit me with this. And then if I think I go over to the draws, yeah, lots of flush draws, lots of combo draws, tons of gut shots. And then, of course, if I want to go study this spot in some more detail, I can hit this little hat, bam, open it up. Here we can see, like,
this is a real hard spot combo.
Yeah,
right here.
This is a tough spot
from either way, because once you check raise here with all those hands and miss, you're like, oh my god, what do I do now? Like, yeah. I know no matter which spot I'm in here on this turn, I'm like aces, I'm like check and pray. I mean, but then sometimes you might want to bet. So, you know, this is a dicey.
I think at this spot they're raising so often, and that's partially because we've put the bet sizing down. Like when you bet quarter pot, they are obligated to check raise you a lot.
I don't think people are hitting this. I don't think like a recreational is hitting this at all. I don't think most people are hitting this at all.
No, for sure. For sure, people are not check raising this much. No way, right? And so, like, but again, we're basically range betting anyway. So typically the way you'd exploit someone who's not check raising enough is you would just bet more, bet wider, but here we've already kind of capped out. And this is one of the maybe drawbacks of a really small size, is that you don't have even more room to exploit. You could maybe start sizing up, I guess, but
yeah.
Anyway, on the turn, like, we already know that when they check raise us, their range is too tight, but on the turn, it's still getting tricky here. I think what's really gross, and like, I actually don't mind facing another bet here, but when they check to me, I'm lost here, Joey. Like, check raise and then check a 3-bet pot is like a hard line to figure out, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, here I'm probably like, I wouldn't just mind just checking everything back, and then, you know, if the spade misses, I'm just gonna bluff catch the river with most of my hands. If they go all in, then I'm gonna flip a coin and make my decision if I think they're bluffing me too much, and if I don't think they're the kind of person that's gonna be bluffing me too much here, I'm just gonna fold. If I think that they might be getting a lot of line here and over bluffing with some hands, and I'm gonna click call and pray.
Yep.
You know, I don't think you can go really wrong with that approach here. And you can maybe start to get more aggressive, build the turn strat like we're looking at here. It says with trips and, you know, maybe mixing some queens. I don't mind like mixing some of those hands, and then pray you don't get check raised again, and then get just check back on the river unless you have, you know, trips or better, even trips or better. I mean, you know, king queen suited maybe, but, you know, if they're the type of person that's going to have a potential 9 or 10 here, because we are going to be turning hands into bluffs. We're going to be turning ace queen into a bluff. We're going to be turning ace jack into a bluff. We're going to be turning our flush draws into bluffs here. So we really do need to start to find some value, in my opinion, Otherwise, if you know what I mean, we're not balanced enough, and you could debate maybe you don't need to be balanced enough here. Maybe you just play it safe and check back and kind of wait on the river. But I think against an aggressive player here, I want to start putting pressure on them. I don't want them to get to showdown with a 9. They're 9/8s and 8/9, 10/9, stuff like that. So
I think one of the tricky parts about this spot is actually finding the bluffs, because when they check raise you, you're already folding out a lot of your air. And so you have to start turning some of these 10x and 9x hands with a draw into a bluff.
yeah,
So
and I don't pick that up easy, because I'm like I'm just saying, oh, let me check back, let me get a free river card. But I wouldn't even consider someone normally thinking about bluffing with some of these combos. But you really got to get nasty here with your combos, and like you kind of have to. This is what's you got to take it to the streets, to the river,
take
all
it
in.
to the streets, Joey.
Yeah,
That's
like
right.
you have to like blast off with some of these hands that you wouldn't think on this flop you got to go all in with. But that's when it gets scary. But I feel like that's where the best players are going to thrive, is they're going to be able to put you in that position here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you got to be able to do it.
You got to just be ready to blast off, especially when you're this deep. I think studying 3-bet pots, check raises, and 3-bet pots is something most people don't do, but it's a surprisingly common strategy. I mean, we're still pretty deep in like a cutoff versus button 3-bet pot. You're deep enough that check raise strategies are still very, very much a thing.
This is what you just told me, was that this is where the edge is.
Yeah, studying these weird spots, especially like spots that are more common than people know, and spots where the pot is typically bigger. Those two factors, and again, spots where the population does not study. That's where you're gonna have a lot of edge, assuming that you don't have gaping holes in your game elsewhere. This is like a nice side path to go down to become an expert in these. I think one thing to pay attention to here is, maybe we can find a good word for this, but spots where the aggressor shifts, so where it goes from one player to another. In this case, the flop, the out of position play cutoff becomes the aggressor, and then on the turn, in position retakes betting lead here. And so in spots like this, where you've kind of both had your ranges narrowed, like we've both faced a bet at this point, both of you have folded out a lot of your air, and the bottom of your range is now closer to very strong hands. And when your bluffs are stronger, when the showdown value is stronger, you need to adjust your value thresholds, and you need to start turning some made hands into bluffs, because you folded most of the natural bluffs on earlier straights.
This one's gonna be making people's head hurt at combos.
Yeah, I guess maybe just to simplify.
This is where when I start, when I'm coaching with you, usually during the session you start really blowing my mind, start cracking open ideas, and all of a sudden my body like starts lighting up, and this is one of those spots where I'm like, oh,
I might have got a little. Let me see if I can rephrase that.
The thing is, you've got like the deepest levels of this explanation, and I know you're simplifying it for me, so we appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Sometimes I can get a little bit rambly, Joey. So it's
that's what I love. I'm like, you're getting me excited. You're like, yeah, you're right. Like out of position did take it. I mean, it's pretty interesting spot. I mean, I don't know. I like this is a real interesting spot to me. This is
a fun spot. I guess just in summary, when you faced the bet and folded your trash, now you have to start turning stronger hands into bluffs, because you already folded the trash. So now we have to start turning 9 high, 10 high, or second pair, third pair, etc., strong ace high into bluffs. So keep in mind the previous action when you're thinking about bluff selection. A lot of players will bet the strong hands and draws here, but they might not be thinking about turning pair of 10s, pair of 9s into a bluff as they should.
You're saying basically you always got to be thinking about what the hands you're going to be turning into bluff, and on a check raise node, when theoretically you're going to be continuing with a stronger range, you have to start to get creative and pick non-intuitive bluffs that,
yes,
under normal circumstances you would not say, hey, I need to go all in with queen 9 on king 10-9, but in a check raise spot you have to visually think ahead with that part of your range to understand that those hands are your bluffs, versus the flop you wouldn't see that, oh yeah, it's my bluff, right? 3 streets, I'm in. So you just got to be very selective on and understanding how the node shifts your bluff threshold.
Right. And like the value thresholds are easy enough to understand on this front. Trips plus, betting for value makes sense. But finding the right bluffs, like a lot of players will neglect that part of their game. Is like, okay, my range is tighter. I got to find new types of bluffs that aren't intuitive to me. And then they end up massively under bluffing. Stuff to pay attention to, stuff like that.
Means you can fold.
Yep. Paying attention to some earlier streets and thinking how the population might be playing that spot, etc. So did you have any other questions for me while we're at it, Joey?
Questions for you. I mean, listen, I got a million questions, but I guess my main takeaways today are, just better identifying how the 10 is that threshold card, getting better at identifying, checking back more on those low cards and kind of building that check strategy. I would say turn, I think we covered some pretty interesting points. I'd say to the river, being able to once again kind of just understand those bluff spots. I think that's going to be the thing that I got to really focus on. And I think a lot of people got to focus on too. So I'd say for me, that's the one street I'm going to put a lot more thought into, and just having a better personal understanding of why to be bluffing the river with what hands, outside of just people are overfolding here. So I've got a natural bluff because I have a big range advantage. We saw that King 10 hand where I saw the A6, A7s. Some of the other boards, I would say the lower boards where you size up flop and size up turn, we saw deuce 5-5, right? 75 flop, the turn. Once again, that's a big bet. On the river, those textures to me are the ones where I'm saying, okay, once I bet my ace king, once I bet my ace queen, those are my natural bluffs, right? I'm blocking aces, I'm blocking kings, I'm blocking queens. So just getting the proper understanding in those spots. But I'd say in general, the spots that we covered today, a lot of great information, a lot to digest, to kind of go back and play around with, and then come back with different questions in my end.
Amazing. Well, Joey, it's been a pleasure studying with you today, and I'm really looking forward to the progress you're going to be making in the near future here, and seeing your journey as you become a GTO Wizard.
Oh yeah, I'm excited. Once again, shout out to GTO Wizard for the partnership, and obviously much love to you as always for all the advice. You helped me out so much, and I'm glad that you'll be able to help out the Legion. The fans out there are going to be excited. So yeah, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it a lot. Appreciate you preparing all this information for me. Now I'm ready to fucking battle, So yeah, I'm excited. I'm hyped up.
It's my honor, Joey. Good luck in the streets, man.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I'll see you soon.